Total Picture Radio's coverage of the IACPR Leadership Strategy Summit 2013 is sponsored by Riviera Advisors, a premier global human resources consulting firm that specializes in helping organizations develop stronger internal recruiting and staffing capabilities. Visit Riviera Advisors on the web at rivieraadvisors.com.
Hi, this is Peter Clayton from Total Picture Radio in New York City today at the IACPR Global Leadership Conference. And I'm very happy to have with me today Will Wolf, who is Managing Director, Global Head of Talent Development and Strategy with Credit Suisse. Will, thank you very much for taking time to speak with me.
Glad to be here, Peter.
So you did a whole session just now titled Putting Big Data into Play. And I have to say that all of the conferences I've attended this year, big data is like the big topic, right. That and mobile. That's what everybody is talking about. So a couple of the interesting things that you talked about is, so big data is such a buzzword in this industry. What's really different between what's going on now and say 10 years ago?
Sure. So I think of the arrival of data into the dialogue we're having in HR to be much like what advertising was probably like 20 or 30 years ago, where people used to joke about how I know I'm wasting 50% of my advertising budget, ha ha ha, I don't know which half.
Right.
But advertising isn't like that anymore. They're much more targeted because they have data and they have analytics and they have the internet and they can target their reach to micro segments of people. I think that HR is on the same threshold today that they were 20 or 30 years ago, where because we have better ERP systems, we have intermediaries and tools like SuccessFactors and Workday, you get access to better reporting. So business leaders are beginning to expect a more data-informed, data-rich conversation with HR professionals, whether they be subject matter experts like we have in recruiting and talent development, or your basic business partners who are generalists that are advising folks on strategy and policy.
What's the ROI on this as far as recruiting cost versus investment? Obviously, all large corporations today are investing a tremendous amount of money in their ERP systems and in tracking and all of the things that they're doing now, trying to get a sense of who is in their organizations and have a better pulse on all of that. And as Jeremy Eskenazi brought up in your session, LinkedIn knows more about your employees at Credit Suisse than probably you do.
Sure. Well, a couple of points, Peter, on this. Contextually, banking is going through a secular change. Our CEO, Brady Dugan, and the head of all of the human capital functions is a woman named Pamela Thomas Graham. They have committed us to being much smarter about how we hire and grow people because it makes economic sense, right? We can't be in the habit, as banks have often been, of always just going across the street and poaching the next guy from the other bank that has the same title.
Which traditionally is exactly how this is.
Brady and Pamela call this grow your own, and we're committed to it because we know it makes economic sense. So we're building the capability internally to do analysis about our human capital practices and policies that are right for Credit Suisse, our bank. We think of LinkedIn as a valuable source of insight for the 70% of Credit Suisse employees that have a LinkedIn profile they have voluntarily created. We can't, however, use LinkedIn as a credible source of regulatory quality data. If a regulator wants from us, they want to know that we are EEOC compliant, if they want to know that we are practicing appropriate pay policies, we have to provide credible data from our own resources, and we have to provide it for everybody. So it's nice to have LinkedIn there, and it's nice for us to be able to access Credit Suisse profiles when we want to fill an internal opening there, but it is by no means exhaustive for us. So we have to also use our own has graduated from Cambridge or Oxford, I have to call Cambridge or Oxford and validate that that's true. I can't put it into our systems until I know it's true. And that's why we have to have that higher burden of data quality, which consumes a lot of time.
Right.
But in the end, we think it's worth it.
One of the charts that you showed in your presentation, you were kind of looking over the past 5 years. We went through this recession. Nobody was really leaving organizations, and now, in the last couple of years, you're seeing, a lot of movement again, a lot of attrition within your high performers. So what are you doing to try to proactively manage that attrition?
So it begins with understanding the causes of attrition and then starting to put in place new practices and new policies to prevent unwanted attrition. There's always going to be a healthy level of, in the American economy, we believe there's a structural level of unemployment you'll never get below, right? People need to leave because they need to pursue other opportunities, they need to grow their careers. We're trying to manage down a problem that we think is costing us some money. So we spend a lot of time analyzing the root causes of attrition so that we better understand is a simple question like, what is the importance of a well-trained manager on an employee population? We know that people react quite positively from a retention standpoint to good management practices. And we can demonstrate this, and this actually gives us more emphasis and more evidence upon which we can tailor our management training practices and our retention of better managers. We can even value good management to a greater degree in our performance reviews. So the insight that comes from the data analysis completely informs changes we make to the way we manage our people and recruit. It affects recruiting to training to all aspects of the human capital, human life cycle.
I've been covering this space for a long time now, and I keep seeing this. High performers really pay for themselves. I mean, it's the amount a high performer brings to an organization is substantially more than just your average performer.
That's true, and we could debate for a long time how you could build an organization full of high performers, or whether or not high performers are motivated by being different from everybody else, and whether that's even possible. But we always use, the chart that I showed was some external research that basically says there's value in this. The more complex the job, the more differentiating a high performer can be. So getting an environment where you can attract, retain, train, and grow high performers is clearly important.
I want you to talk about, you really kind of broke this down with big data, the steps to improving insight through big data, people analytics, define taxonomy. So talk to me a little bit about that and how you approach this and the kinds of things that you were able to glean in really digging into this data.
Sure, Peter. In my speech, what I attempted to do is maybe destigmatize the big words, big data, that you have to have some sort of supercomputer to have better insight on human capital practices. I don't think that's the case, although people like to use that term. What we're really talking about is what analysis of variables can do in informing our people decision making. So how do you build the capacity to do that? You need to have a common language of human capital data and definitions. What do we mean when we say retention? What do we mean when we're talking about our screening effectiveness, our onboarding effectiveness? And companies need to have that taxonomy as a basis for problem solving. From there, it's about getting data quality that is good enough to do analysis, and it's not supercomputer-driven analysis. We're talking employee records to run an analysis of maybe 30, 40,000 people in our case, where we want to look at patterns among variables and how they relate to one another so we have insights. An example of that would be, again, the relationship between a supervisor's performance rating and the attrition that they have in their group. What we've been able to show is that there's a clear relationship between well-performing supervisors and retaining people. That won't surprise anybody. That's been well documented outside. We have done a contextual adaptation of that to our own environment at Credit Suisse, meaning we know how that works in Asia, we know how that works in Switzerland, we know how that works in the United States, and we can inform our practices better based on that analysis.
So gather insights and priorities. Again, when people are speaking about big data, especially in relationship to human capital and talent acquisition, a lot of what they're really talking about is predictive analytics.
Correct.
That's how it's the predictive analytics piece that really informs you on taking the actions that you need to take.
Right. And from there, presupposing you can find relationships between variables that allow you to predict human behaviors better, not perfectly, but better, then the question comes, well, so what? And for us, where we spend a lot of our time is moving from the insights of the analysis to the practical things we can do to actually address some of the findings. So if we believe that after people get promoted, they are susceptible to poaching from other companies, that's an interesting transition that we need to better manage. How do we actually welcome them into their new role in our organization without recognizing the fact that they may be actually at risk? They may have perceived in their own mind that they've hit a milestone where they deserve more access to opportunity, more money, or what have you. We need to be anticipating that stuff. And it's those types of choices that we need to make based on the data that we've analyzed.
What does it cost Credit Suisse when a high-performing executive leaves your company and you have to replace? What does one executive leaving your organization cost you?
We've analyzed this, inspired by a lot of academic research, and then mapping those ideas to our own environment. And I would say the interesting relationship here, Peter, is that the more senior you are, the more it costs relative to what we're paying you. So that's an important distinction.
Okay.
The more senior you are, if you're a junior employee, it wouldn't be unreasonable to say somewhere between 50 and 80% of your annual compensation might be at risk in leaving you. If you're a more senior employee, it could be as high as 150 to 200% of that much more expensive senior compensation, because you're looking at replacement costs that include search fees that are quite high, and longer times to replace because it's hard to find, and you lose productivity. So the more senior, the more expensive, even relative to their own compensation.
So something else you brought up is you have really started an initiative at Credit Suisse where you're trying to build up an internal senior level recruiting team to go out and actively solicit those kinds of placements. Tell us a little bit about how you went about doing that and some of the results that you're getting for having that team in place.
As I mentioned earlier, Brady Dugan, our CEO, Pamela Thomas-Graham, who's our head of all of our human capital branding and communications functions, they are committed to the idea that if we have an opening at Credit Suisse, first dibs go to an internal employee as opposed to the person from across the street. They call it grow your own. We're actively trying to foster a grow your own environment. To accelerate that, we've created an internal search function. So when an opening comes and people want to post it, we have a rule that basically says you cannot post that job and go outside until our internal guys have had a couple weeks to try to fill it from within. First dibs go to insiders, and we proactively reach out to people who are very comfortable in their roles wherever they're sitting and say, if you have the right background, we'd like you to consider coming over and taking this new position. Would that be of interest to you? It might be a step-up opportunity. And what we've learned from experimenting with this in the United States is that people love when we call them and say, we might have a new opportunity for you here. Do you want to hear more about it confidentially, so we don't run afoul of your manager yet? They love this idea.
Yeah, I think that plays really well into the whole retention issue, because people are always looking for, high performers look for opportunities.
They love to know that we're looking out for them, and that there's a
Exactly.
place that they can go if they want to learn more.
So you had mentioned that right now that you are in the data. What's so important about all of this, Will, is when you have this data and you're able to really analyze. I mean, you were talking about the fact that you've only had an applicant tracking system, Taleo, implemented for a couple of years within your organization, where you're able to really look and assess where talent is with different skill sets, right?
Yep.
So when you have that kind of information, that plays such a huge role in the whole onboarding process, right?
Yeah, so we study all aspects of the human capital life cycle to better understand, where we can be growing people faster, who we should be hiring, apples to oranges comparisons, and so forth. And so, yeah, I mean, one of the things we've learned is that the onboarding event is pivotal. Showing up to a place where you're getting acclimatized to the culture, what steps we can take to actually make you understand the history of Credit Suisse. We've been around since 1856. we were founded by Alfred Escher, who was a statesman who realized that if he didn't fund the building of the Gotthard Railroad, that the entire European economy was going to pass by Switzerland and go straight from Germany to Italy, circumventing the Swiss Alps. That was a social purpose.
Really cool.
It's really interesting history,
Yeah.
and if we're not bringing that to life for people, they miss the fundamental mission and the purpose of the company. We think it's important to help people understand that. At the same time, we think it's important for them to get a computer that works, a name badge that's spelled right. These are not trivial things, right? It's a complicated process. So yeah, through our analysis, we've seen that onboarding milestone is a big deal, and so we're investing a lot in making that work for people.
Tell us what you've learned about millennials, and especially around the topic of performance ratings.
You know, it's interesting because you know, we fight a very competitive battle with other banks over recent graduates of top universities. We hire hundreds of them a year, and it is bare knuckle competition. To watch millennials then leave us to go to private equity or to other banks is heartbreaking, because we're investing so much in winning these head-to-head competitions. So we do think about millennials as a segment of our population that might require handling that is different from more senior populations. It's clear that they have different preferences and attitudes.
Absolutely.
And we actually have launched, we had an internal project group study the millennials question, and as a result of that, we've launched a training program called Managing Millennials for people basically my age who you know, may not use social media, and or may believe that only may have attitudes about performance ratings and coaching and feedback that don't map to what they're used to, where they're coming from. It's a real difference, but it's the kind of thing that really does lend itself to analysis and to study.
You have been watching like 30,000 people over 5 years, and you talked about the analysis of key variables around, you know, the whole retention, hiring, you know, human capital process. Obviously, compensation figures largely in this whole conversation. So again, how are you using big data to analyze where you might have problems and how you're going to address those?
So the project you're referencing, we have a database where we've tracked Credit Suisse employees over time, and at the end of that period of time, they either stay or they go. And we've studied the relationship of 50 or more variables with that actual outcome of staying or leaving to try to establish relationships. This is a classic big data analysis that looks for relations between variables, and we've learned a lot. We learned much more than we would learn simply by doing an exit survey. That's also useful. It'd be crazy not to have some insight from people on the way out as to what would have kept them. But we also see things, we can't through an exit survey, for example, really understand the impact of, say, the size of the team that you're on. We believe that there's an actual sweet spot for team size that anybody would work on in terms of the cohesion and the likelihood of retention for the people in that group. We have similar learnings about compensation, performance ratings. Those are the types of variables that we track, and we believe that our answers are, in some cases they wouldn't surprise you, but we believe that they are close enough and contextual enough that it's important to do that analysis in our own context as opposed to just taking best practices off the shelf.
Yeah, another data point on this, and this is something we talked about a little bit, but I think it's really important for people to understand that internal mobility, especially with Gen Yers, is really important, and they look for those opportunities.
That's one of those variables that we track against that attrition and retention variable is, you know, how many times you've moved and what's the right frequency, and clearly people value the ability to grow their careers in a bank, as evidenced by the fact they've been able to take multiple jobs.
Campus recruiting is something else that you focused on. That is, as you said, it's incredibly critical to your organization, and yet it's so competitive, and it's really difficult to figure out how to really make those attractions.
We're not alone in the competition for top campus talent. We compete with consulting, we compete with technology, we compete with other banks. And so we're always working on, you know, what themes work. We don't just do data analysis. We do focus groups with students who may have accepted our offers, they may have not have accepted our offers. We always want to know what we're projecting, what they're reading in the newspaper that's resonating with them, and how we need to address that in the campus environment, because it's hotly competitive.
Right.
It's actually quite healthy, because it forces us every year to reflect on what we can learn from last year's experience and how do we improve our game. And our guys are really good at taking those insights and then bringing them back into the campus recruiting environment.
And one of the things I find so fascinating about what's going on today is that you're competing against not just other banks, but Microsoft and Deloitte and other organizations for the same top talent.
I think these things come in waves. And in the dot-com years, it was incredibly difficult. I was at a consulting firm then, and we thought we would never be able to get people to come and join us if we couldn't offer them bizarre equity packages that had no real value, but on paper they were worth millions of dollars. And then 2 years later, people were begging us for opportunities with things on their resumes you couldn't even understand, right? These things ebb and flow. We've been here since 1856, and we've been a top draw in America, in Switzerland, all over the world. So for us, it's about tuning the machine as we go, and we're going to be here, 100 years from now, having the same conversation, hopefully better.
Okay, so I really appreciate your time today, Will.
Sure.
So talk to me a little bit about your plans for 2014. What kinds of things are you going to be doing, and especially in this whole aspect of big data, to help facilitate talent acquisition and retention within your organization?
It's not hard to. Any professional that works in human capital could easily recite to you the things they'd like to know about how to create more value for the organization. So we've been studying the attrition event exhaustively. We feel like we have a lot better understanding of what goes on there. The next obvious thing for us to be looking at is how we can acquire better and how we can actually be sharper about who wants to come to us and who we want to have come. Join our bank. But that's, I could make you a long list of all the things we'd like to know. Return on investment in talent training and development. There are so many interesting questions. There's a risk of actually learning too much and not being able to operationalize the insights. So we're doing it at a steady pace.
Credit Suisse, conservative European bank. Are you using social media aggressively in your recruiting efforts? Are you using Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn?
Yeah, from a pure, comparable to other banks basis, I think we're actually pretty smart at virtual recruiting. So anybody who's had to manage a recruiting budget, particularly on campus in recent years, realizes that the numbers of schools you have a presence at drives cost. To the extent you can actually serve some schools well in a virtual environment, that's important. But we use social media in terms of how we do our recruiting. We certainly use LinkedIn as a source of ideas for who to, and that's how we've taken down agency cost as a result.
Right.
There clearly are huge applications for that type of media in our space.
Well, Will, thank you very much for taking time to speak with us here on Total Picture Radio. It's been great to meet you here at the IACPR Global Leadership Conference in New York, and look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Total Picture Radio's exclusive interview with Will Wolf, Managing Director, Global Head of Talent Acquisition and Development with Credit Suisse, was brought to you by Riviera Advisors, a premier IACPR sponsor. You can discover more about the IACPR at iacpr.org. You'll find this interview, including a complete transcript, in the Talent Acquisition channel of Total Picture Radio. That's totalpicture.com. Learn more about Riviera Advisors' Strategic Talent Management Advisory Services at rivieraadvisors.com. This is Peter Clayton reporting. Thanks for tuning in.